A son's innocent curiosity turned into a life-altering discovery when he spotted something impossible in his parents' wedding album. The wedding photos, meant to capture eternal love, instead revealed a secret that would shatter his understanding of family and time itself. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, the steady patter of droplets against the roof filled the otherwise silent attic as Daniel rummaged through dusty cardboard boxes. It had been just 3 weeks since his father's funeral, and the family home felt emptier than ever, each creaking floorboard a reminder of the void left behind. His mother had suggested he might find comfort in sorting through some old memories while she visited her sister for the weekend. Daniel hadn't expected to find solace among cobwebs and forgotten keepsakes, but he needed something, anything, to ease the hollow ache in his chest. The attic air was thick with dust and nostalgia as his fingers brushed against an ornate leather-bound album tucked beneath a stack of Christmas decorations. He pulled it free, wiping away years of accumulated dust with his palm. The album was heavier than it looked, weighted with memories from a time before he existed. As Daniel settled onto an old trunk, he carefully opened the cover, revealing his parents' wedding date embossed in faded gold lettering. June 17, 1984. The pages crackled as he turned them, yellowed with age but still preserving the moments captured decades ago. His father looked so young, so vibrant in his black tuxedo, a stark contrast to the frail man who had slipped away in a hospital bed just weeks ago. His mother was radiant in white, her smile genuine and eyes bright with promise. Daniel found himself smiling back at these younger versions of his parents, feeling a bittersweet connection to their happiness. Then he saw it, the photograph that made his breath catch and his skin prickle with unease. It was a standard wedding party shot, his parents centered among family and friends outside the church. Everyone was smiling, confetti suspended in mid-air around them like frozen rain. But there, standing just behind his father's right shoulder, was a face Daniel recognized immediately, a face that couldn't possibly be there. His fingers trembled as they traced the figure in the background, his mind racing to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't just an odd coincidence or a trick of light. This was impossible. This was terrifying. Daniel squinted at the faded wedding photo, trying to make sense of the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. The image showed his parents' special day from 27 years ago, his mother radiant in her modest white dress, his father looking younger and happier than Daniel had ever seen him in real life. Their friends surrounded them, faces flushed with champagne and celebration. Everyone caught mid-laugh or smile. He ran his finger across the glossy surface, taking in details he'd never noticed before. His mother's pearl earrings, the same ones she still wore on special occasions. His father's slightly crooked boutonniere, and the way his parents' hands intertwined so naturally. The reception had been small, just 50 guests at his grandparents' backyard, according to the stories he'd heard countless times. But as Daniel's eyes drifted to the edges of the photograph, something made him freeze. There, partially obscured behind a cluster of guests near the garden fence, stood a man Daniel didn't recognize. Unlike everyone else captured in mid-celebration, this figure remained perfectly still, facing directly toward the camera. His expression wasn't angry or threatening, it was the complete absence of expression that disturbed Daniel. The man wore a dark suit that seemed slightly out of place among the casual summer attire of the other guests, and his posture was unnaturally rigid. "That's weird," Daniel muttered, bringing the photo closer to his face. The stranger's eyes seemed to meet his across the decades, unblinking and aware. Daniel felt a chill, despite the warm afternoon sun streaming through his apartment windows. He flipped through more photos from the same day, and his unease deepened. The same man appeared in 3 more pictures, always at the periphery, always staring directly at the camera, always expressionless. In each shot, He seemed to be standing slightly closer to Daniel's parents. Daniel set the album down and reached for his phone. He needed to call his mother. Something about this didn't feel right. Not just the presence of a stranger at their intimate wedding, but the methodical way he appeared in multiple photos, like he was documenting his own presence there. Daniel couldn't explain why, but he felt certain this man wasn't an invited guest, and he needed to know who he was. Everyone else in the wedding photos radiated joy, their faces caught in genuine laughter or tender smiles as they celebrated his parents' special day. But this man was different. Standing at the edge of group shots, his expression remained flat, almost calculated, while others around him basked in the moment. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was simply going through the motions, like an actor poorly mimicking happiness. His eyes held something cold, detached, yet somehow intensely focused, as if he were there for an entirely different purpose than celebrating a wedding. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he studied the man's face. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though Daniel was certain they'd never met. The stranger appeared in 3 different photos, always positioned slightly apart from the main group, always with that same unsettling gaze. But it wasn't just his expression that seemed wrong. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel whispered, leaning closer to the album. He pulled out his phone and snapped several pictures, focusing specifically on the mysterious guest. When he zoomed in on the man's wrist, his breath caught. There, partially visible beneath the cuff of his suit jacket, was a watch, not the bulky analog timepieces common in the 1980s when his parents married, but something sleek, digital, with a distinctive curved edge that looked unmistakably modern. Daniel's heart began to race. He'd seen enough tech magazines to recognize the design language of current smartwatches, but that was impossible. These photos were taken 35 years ago. He zoomed in further, examining every pixel of the image. There was no mistake. The watch on this stranger's wrist wouldn't be invented for decades after this wedding took place. Daniel sat back, his mind spinning with impossible questions. Who was this man? And more disturbingly, how could he be wearing technology from the future? Daniel's heart hammered against his ribcage like a trapped bird. He flipped the photo over, checking for a date stamp, June 19th, 1963. That couldn't be right. Digital watches weren't invented until the 1970s, and they weren't commonplace until well into the 80s. The sleek, modern timepiece on the stranger's wrist was an impossibility, a technological anachronism that simply couldn't exist in that era. Daniel ran his finger over the glossy surface, half expecting the image to change under his touch. But the impossible watch remained, its digital face clearly visible despite the photo's age. Confused and increasingly unsettled, he scattered the remaining wedding photos across the kitchen table, creating a mosaic of his parents' happiest day. His fingers trembled slightly as he examined each image with meticulous care. The ceremony, the cake cutting, the first dance, group shots with family members long since passed. He scrutinized every face in every frame. But the mysterious man with the watch appeared in no other photographs. Not at the ceremony, not during the reception, not in any of the candid moments captured throughout the day. It was as if he had materialized for just that single moment, long enough to be captured by the photographer's lens, before vanishing back into whatever impossible place he had come from. Daniel sat back in his chair, a cold sensation spreading through his stomach. The logical part of his brain scrambled for explanations. Perhaps it was just an unusual analog watch that looked digital from certain angles. Maybe the photo had been doctored, though he couldn't imagine why. Or could it be that his eyes were playing tricks on him after hours of staring at old photographs? Yet no matter how he rationalized, he couldn't shake the disturbing feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with what he was seeing. The stranger's presence felt deliberate. His anachronistic watch, like a message across time, waiting for someone, waiting for Daniel to notice. Daniel's hands trembled as he typed frantically into the search bar. Unexplained figures in old photographs. The clock on his laptop read 3:15 in the morning, but sleep was impossible now. His mind raced with questions about the strange man who had appeared in his parents' wedding album. After scrolling through dozens of paranormal websites and debunked ghost stories, he found himself on an obscure forum called Timeless Watchers. This might be nothing, he muttered to himself, clicking through thread after thread of blurry images and wild theories. Most were easily dismissible. Lens flares, double exposures, or simply people forgetting who attended their events. But then a post titled, "The Wedding Guest Nobody Invited," caught his eye. The user, Shadowhunter78, had uploaded a collection of wedding photographs from different decades, all featuring unidentified guests. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The third image in the collection showed a wedding party from 1948. The bride wore a classic post-war gown, the groom a military uniform. But there, standing at the edge of the frame, was a face Daniel recognized instantly. The same thin man with cold, calculating eyes, the same expressionless face, and on his wrist, unmistakably, what appeared to be a modern watch, completely out of place for 1948. "This is impossible," Daniel whispered, zooming in on the image. The resemblance was uncanny, not just similar, but identical. Same facial structure, same penetrating stare, same positioning at the edge of the celebration. The post had garnered dozens of responses, many from people claiming to have found the same man in their family photos spanning decades. One comment stood out: "He never ages. Never changes clothes, always watches from a distance. My grandmother called him the Observer." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Another user had written, "Check the background of any major historical event. He's there, always watching, never participating." Daniel created an account and quickly typed a response, attaching a cropped image from his parents' wedding. "Found him in my parents' wedding photos from 1992. Who is he?" His finger hovered over the submit button for a moment before pressing it. Within minutes, his private message inbox pinged with a notification from the forum administrator. "Delete this post. Delete these photos, for your family's safety. He knows when he's been spotted." Daniel found himself falling deeper into the rabbit hole. The online community dedicated to tracking the Watcher had thousands of members, all sharing their own theories and discoveries. Some claimed he was a time traveler, others suggested he was an immortal being who had walked among humans for centuries. What struck Daniel most was how the mysterious figure always appeared with technology that shouldn't have existed at the time. Smartphones in 80s photos, modern wireless earbuds in 90s gatherings, and sleek devices no one could identify in even older images. He's been spotted in 27 countries over 6 decades, wrote one forum member who had meticulously catalogued every known appearance. Always in the background, never interacting, just watching. Daniel created an anonymous account and uploaded the cropped image from his parents' wedding, careful not to include any identifying details about his family. Within hours, his post exploded with comments. "Classic Watcher pose. Look at that device in his hand. This is one of the clearest shots we've seen. When exactly was this taken? We need to add it to the timeline." What had begun as a disturbing discovery was transforming into something else entirely. An obsession. Daniel found himself staying up until 3 in the morning, scrolling through hundreds of posts, comparing images and reading wild speculations. He started a digital folder on his laptop, saving every piece of information he could find about the Watcher. The more he researched, the more one question burned in his mind. Why was this mysterious figure at his parents' wedding? Was it random chance? Or was there a connection to his family? Daniel looked at the calendar. His mother would be home from her business trip in 4 days. His father was unreachable in the wilderness. Should he wait to ask them directly, or continue investigating on his own? The thought of confronting his parents made his stomach knot with anxiety. What if they knew something? What if they had been hiding a secret all these years? He decided to dig deeper into his family history first. There had to be clues somewhere. Old photo albums, journals, letters, anything that might reveal a connection. The Watcher had appeared in their lives for a reason, and Daniel was determined to find out why, no matter where the truth might lead him. Daniel carefully removed the old wedding album from his bag, watching his mother's face for any sign of recognition. The care home staff had warned him that some days were better than others with her memory. Today, her eyes seemed clearer as she smiled at him from her armchair by the window. "I brought something special to look at together, Mom," he said, opening the album across both their laps. Dad's wedding photos. Her fingers, thin and papery now, traced the edges of the yellowed pages with surprising tenderness. She smiled at the images of her younger self, radiant in white lace, until Daniel carefully turned to the page with the church steps photograph. He pointed to the figure in the background. "Mum, do you recognize this man? The one standing behind you and Dad?" The change was immediate and disturbing. All color drained from his mother's face as her eyes darted frantically between the photograph and Daniel's face. Her hands began to tremble violently, causing the album to shake on their laps. "Mum, are you okay?" Daniel asked, suddenly concerned he'd made a terrible mistake bringing this up. She leaned closer to the photo, her breathing shallow and quick. "I remember him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was at the church, but no one knew who he was." Her fingers hovered over the stranger's face, not quite touching the photo, as if afraid of making contact. "But your father thought he was just lost, someone who wandered in from the street. But he wasn't lost, was he?" Daniel pressed gently. His mother's eyes, suddenly sharp with fear, locked onto his. He kept showing up. "At the restaurant during our honeymoon, outside our first apartment." Her voice dropped even lower. "I saw him watching the house the night before your father disappeared." Daniel felt a chill run through his body. "Oh, why didn't you ever tell anyone?" "Because," she whispered, clutching his hand with surprising strength, "he came to see me after your father vanished. Said if I ever mentioned him to anyone, you would be next." Daniel pressed her for more details, but she shook her head firmly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've said enough. Some things are better left buried in the past." She gathered her purse and coat, avoiding his gaze. "Please, Daniel, for your own sake, let this go." Before he could protest further, she hurried out of the cafe, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the heaviness she left behind. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk, scrolling through old family photos he'd digitized, searching for any other appearances of the mysterious figure. The rain tapped against his window, creating an eerie rhythm in the otherwise silent apartment. His laptop chimed with a new email notification, no subject line, no sender information, just a single attachment. His hand hovered over the mouse, hesitating before clicking. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing another wedding photo, not his parents', but dated 1975 according to the timestamp in the corner. The bride and groom were strangers to him, their faces frozen in happiness, unaware of what lurked in the background. There, partially hidden behind a decorative column, stood the same figure, the Watcher. The same hollow eyes, the same unnatural stillness, the same bone-chilling presence. Below the image, a single line of text: "Stop searching, or you'll be next." Daniel's blood ran cold. He slammed his laptop shut and backed away from his desk. Who had sent this? How did they know what he was investigating? He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed Sarah's number, but it went straight to voicemail. The lights in his apartment flickered once, twice. Outside, The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Daniel moved to the living room, pulling the curtains closed. For the first time since finding that wedding photo, he felt not just curious or concerned, but genuinely afraid. Someone was watching him now, tracking his movements, monitoring his search. He poured himself a stiff drink, trying to steady his nerves. The threat was clear, but so was something else: confirmation. The watcher wasn't just in his parents' wedding photos. This wasn't some bizarre coincidence or family-specific haunting. This was something larger, something that spanned decades, something that had remained hidden until now. Fear clawed at Daniel's chest as he spread the photos across his bedroom floor, arranging them chronologically. He couldn't let this go, not when the pattern was becoming clearer with each image he examined. The mysterious figure, the one he'd mentally started calling the Watcher, appeared in the background of not just his parents' wedding, but in several other wedding photos he'd found in his mother's keepsake boxes, always positioned near the couple, never drawing attention, yet unmistakably present once you knew to look for him. It's the watch that gives him away, Daniel whispered to himself, using a magnifying glass to study the man's wrist. Despite the decades-old photographs, the timepiece looked oddly modern, sleek and distinctive, with what appeared to be a black face and silver trim. The watcher himself changed slightly from photo to photo, sometimes with glasses, sometimes with different colored hair. But that watch remained constant, like a signature. Daniel pinned the photos to his wall, connecting them with red string like a detective in a crime thriller. He added yellow sticky notes with locations and dates. Boston, 1987, Chicago, 1992, Philadelphia, 1995, and of course, San Francisco, 2001, his parents' wedding. His hands trembled as he wrote the next set of dates beside each wedding photo, the dates of the tragedies that followed within a year of each celebration. The Boston couple died in a house fire 6 months after their wedding. The Chicago bride disappeared while jogging 3 weeks after returning from her honeymoon. The Philadelphia groom suffered a fatal accident at work, just shy of their first anniversary. And his own parents, the car crash that killed his father 11 months after they exchanged vows, leaving his mother a widow with an infant son. Daniel stepped back, his breath catching in his throat as he absorbed the full horror of what he was seeing. This wasn't coincidence. Someone, this watcher, was connected to all these tragedies. But why? What possible motive could link these seemingly random couples across different cities and years? He grabbed his phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. Should he call Detective Rivera again? Would she believe him this time, or dismiss him as paranoid like before? Daniel's father had died so suddenly last year, a heart attack, they said. His mother hadn't been the same since, plagued by nightmares that left her screaming in the night. Now, staring at the wedding photos with this mysterious figure lurking in the background of each one, Daniel couldn't help but wonder. Was the watcher somehow involved in his father's death? The timing seemed too coincidental. The nightmares, the strange occurrences around their home, and now this ghostly presence from 25 years ago. With trembling hands, Daniel copied the clearest photo of the stranger and began his search. It took 3 days of calls and dead ends before he found someone who might help: Gregory Wilkins, one of the photographers who'd worked at his parents' wedding. The man was retired now, living in a small apartment across town. "I remember that day well," Gregory said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the photo Daniel had brought. "Beautiful ceremony. Your mother was radiant." His finger tapped the image of the stranger. "And I remember him too." Daniel leaned forward. "You do?" Hard to forget. Never smiled. That one. Kept to himself, watching everything. "I assumed he was a distant relative." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "The strange thing was, after the ceremony, I tried to get a group shot. Everyone was there except him. Vanished completely." Did anyone speak to him? Your father did. Actually, Gregory's voice lowered. I saw them talking near the bar. Your father looked troubled afterward. Daniel's heart raced. What did they talk about? No idea. But your father drank heavily after that conversation. Very out of character from what your mother told me. On the bus ride home, Daniel's mind spun with possibilities. His father had spoken to the Watcher. Whatever was said had disturbed him deeply. And now, 25 years later, his father was dead, and the same figure had reappeared in their lives. That night, Daniel sat at his computer, searching obituaries from the weeks following his parents' wedding. If the Watcher was connected to deaths, perhaps there was a pattern. 3 hours in, he found something. A local businessman had died unexpectedly, just 2 weeks after the wedding. In the funeral photo accompanying the obituary, Daniel spotted a familiar face in the background. The Watcher had been there too. The photographer's hands trembled slightly as he recounted his experience. I've been in this business for 35 years, and I've never seen anything like it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every time I tried to capture that man, the Watcher, as your father called him, my camera would malfunction. Film would suddenly be exposed, digital cards would corrupt, lenses would fog up inexplicably. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee to steady himself. Out of dozens of attempts, only one photograph survived, the very same one you're holding now. Daniel looked down at the weathered image in his hands. The mysterious figure's face partially obscured, yet somehow more menacing for it. The photographer leaned forward, his eyes intense with warning. Listen to me carefully, young man. There are things in this world that resist being documented, being remembered. They exist in the periphery of our reality for a reason. The old man's finger tapped the edge of the photograph, careful not to touch the figure itself. Your parents never spoke of him again after the wedding, did they? Daniel shook his head, realizing the truth of it. Despite all their stories, this figure had never featured in any of them. There's wisdom in that silence, the photographer continued. Some people aren't meant to be remembered. Let sleeping ghosts lie. A chill ran through Daniel as he noticed something he hadn't before. The way the figure seemed to be looking not at the camera, but somehow through it, as if aware of future viewers, as if aware of Daniel himself, decades later. What happened to the other guests who saw him? Daniel asked, unable to tear his gaze away from those shadowed eyes. The photographer's silence stretched uncomfortably before he finally answered. Nothing good comes from pursuing this, son. Your parents survived because they chose to forget. He reached for the photograph. Perhaps you should do the same. Daniel pulled the photo back protectively. I can't. Not until I understand. The old man sighed deeply, resignation etching deeper lines into his already weathered face. Then God help you. Because once you acknowledge the Watcher, he acknowledges you back. He stood slowly, joints creaking with age. And if you continue down this path, you'll find me at this address when you're ready to get rid of that photo, day or night. He scribbled something on a napkin and slid it across the table. Daniel pocketed it without looking. Thank you for meeting me. Don't thank me, the photographer said, already turning away. Just be careful what you invite into your life. Daniel ignored the warning, choosing instead to dive deeper into the mystery. The more he learned about his father's past, the more compelled he felt to continue. That evening, while his mother was working late, he returned to the attic and carefully examined the remaining contents of the dusty box. Buried beneath old tax forms and faded receipts, he discovered something that made his heart race, a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1967. The headline read, "Local scientists disappear without trace." The article detailed how 3 prominent physicists had vanished simultaneously, with police baffled by the lack of evidence. What caught Daniel's attention was a small paragraph mentioning rumors of the scientists' involvement with a secretive group obsessed with theoretical time travel. The article dismissed these claims as fantastical speculation, but Daniel's hands trembled as he read. "And they were operating right here," he whispered to himself, noting that the scientists had all worked at the university just 20 minutes from his childhood home. The article mentioned authorities finding strange symbols at one scientist's apartment, described as circular designs with intricate clockwork patterns. The next day, Daniel skipped his afternoon classes and headed to the city library. The elderly archivist eyed him suspiciously as he requested access to newspaper records from the 60s, but eventually led him to a basement room filled with microfilm reels. After 3 hours of searching, his eyes burning from strain, Daniel found what he was looking for, a small photograph accompanying an obituary. The deceased, a Professor Martin Whittaker, was wearing a lapel pin with a symbol that matched the logo on the strange watch exactly. The obituary mentioned Whittaker's contributions to temporal physics and his membership in a research collective called the Custodians of Chronology. The Custodians, Daniel breathed, finally having a name for the group. He quickly photographed the microfilm screen with his phone, his mind racing. If this society had been experimenting with time travel in the 60s, and his father somehow possessed their device, what did that mean? And why had his father never mentioned any of this? The questions multiplied, each more disturbing than the last. Daniel realized he was no longer just investigating a curious family secret. He was potentially uncovering something that defied the laws of physics as he understood them. He reached out to a conspiracy forum, a place he'd browsed occasionally but never posted on before. With trembling fingers, he uploaded several of the wedding photos, carefully circling the shadowy figure and explaining his discoveries about the missing persons cases. "Am I crazy, or is there something sinister connecting these disappearances to my parents' wedding?" he wrote, half expecting to be ridiculed. Within hours, a user named Archivist sent him a private message. "You're not crazy. I've been tracking this for decades. We should meet in person. Some things shouldn't be discussed online." The message included a phone number. After a sleepless night debating whether to call, he finally dialed the number the next morning. A woman's voice, gravelly with age, answered immediately as if she'd been waiting by the phone. They agreed to meet at Rosie's, a rundown cafe on the edge of town where, as the archivist put it, nobody pays attention to other people's conversations. He arrived early, choosing a booth in the back corner. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and decades of grease. A bell jingled as the door opened, and he looked up to see a woman in her 60s enter. She wore a faded denim jacket despite the warm weather, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She scanned the room with alert eyes before spotting him and walking over with surprising purpose in her step. "You look like your father," she said without introduction, sliding into the booth across from him. "You knew my father?" he asked, startled. The archivist's eyes were sharp, full of secrets and something else. Was it sorrow? "I knew of him, and I know about the photographer at your parents' wedding." She pulled out an ancient leather notebook, its pages yellowed and stuffed with newspaper clippings. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I've been documenting these cases since 1973. When my own sister disappeared after a wedding where the same figure appeared in photos." He felt a chill run through him. "Who is he? What does he want?" "Not who," she corrected, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What? And as for what it wants?" She opened the notebook to a page filled with dates and locations. "That's what I've spent my life trying to understand. The custodians believe there are moments in history that must be preserved at all costs," she explained, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Think of them as guardians of time's proper flow." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. "And the Watcher, he's their enforcer. When something threatens to alter a critical moment, he appears." The way she described it made David's skin crawl. This entity wasn't just observing, it was ensuring fate stayed locked on its predetermined course. The more she spoke, the more his father's wedding photos made a terrible kind of sense. That figure you saw isn't just watching, it's correcting, making sure everything happens exactly as it should. David thought about his parents' seemingly perfect love story, wondering now if it had been orchestrated rather than organic. But why my parents? What was so important about their wedding? Emma's expression darkened. That's what troubles me. The custodians only intervene at nexus points, moments that affect countless futures. She hesitated before continuing. And there's something else you should know, David. Those who notice the Watcher, their lives often begin to unravel. Her eyes met his, filled with genuine concern. It's like being marked. Once you see the pattern, you become part of it. David felt a chill run through him. Are you saying I'm in danger because I found these photos? Not necessarily danger, she clarified, but disruption, certainly. The universe doesn't like when its mechanisms are exposed. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. People who spot the Watcher often experience strange coincidences, unlikely accidents or sudden tragedies. It's as if reality itself becomes unstable around them. David thought about his father's sudden illness, his mother's increasing anxiety, his own recent string of misfortunes. Had it all started when he'd first noticed that figure in the background? Or had the Watcher appeared because these events were already destined to happen? So what do I do? He asked, feeling suddenly very small in a universe that seemed increasingly mechanical and predetermined. How do I stop this? Emma's smile was sad. That's the question, isn't it? Some say you can't fight fate. Others believe awareness itself is the first step toward freedom. Daniel felt a cold dread settling in his bones. The enormity of what he'd discovered weighed on him like a physical presence. If the Watcher had been stalking his family for generations, appearing in photographs throughout their history, what chance did he have? Was he doomed simply for noticing what others had missed? There has to be a way to stop this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't just wait for it to come for me. The archivist's eyes softened with something that looked like pity. She seemed to be weighing her options, debating whether to share something crucial. Please, Daniel begged, if you know anything that could help me, anything at all. After a long moment, she sighed and reached into a drawer of her desk. Her fingers trembled slightly as she withdrew a yellowed manila envelope. From it, she produced a photograph he hadn't seen before, faded and worn around the edges. This is the only known image of the Watcher alone, she explained, sliding it across the desk. Daniel studied the photograph. Unlike the wedding pictures or his grandfather's graduation, this image showed the Watcher standing solitary before an ornate clock tower. Its face was still obscured by shadow, but something about its posture seemed different, almost vulnerable. The clock tower still stands in Old Town, the archivist continued. It's said that the Watcher is bound to certain rules, certain patterns. Some believe it must return to this spot every 50 years. Daniel's mind raced with calculations. That would be next week, she finished for him. The spring equinox, to be precise. What happens if I'm there waiting? The archivist shook her head. No one knows for certain. No one who's tried has ever returned to tell the tale. But there are whispers that the Watcher can be trapped, or at least confronted at this location during its return. Daniel pocketed the photograph, a plan already forming in his mind. If he could somehow document the Watcher, expose it to the world, perhaps its power would diminish. Or perhaps he could discover what it wanted after all these years of silent observation. Thank you, he said, rising from his chair. Daniel, the archivist called as he reached the door. Be careful. Curiosity has its price. She leaned forward, her weathered hands wrapping around her teacup as if drawing strength from its warmth. Every time someone tries to alter fate, "He appears," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Watcher isn't evil, Daniel. He's more like a guardian of how things are supposed to be." Her eyes, clouded with cataracts yet somehow piercing, held his gaze. "The only way out is to accept what has happened and let go of the past. Your parents' story has already been written." Daniel nodded politely, but inside, his mind rebelled against every word. He paid for their coffees, thanked the old woman, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The cafe door jingled behind him, a cheerful sound that felt starkly out of place with the heaviness in his chest. Walking down the darkening street, Daniel felt utterly defeated. The photos, the shadowy figure, his mother's illness, everything pointed to some cosmic plan he couldn't fight. Traffic lights changed from red to green, people hurried past, and the world continued spinning, oblivious to his internal struggle. Yet with each step, something shifted inside him. A spark of defiance, small but fierce, began to burn. Who was this woman to tell him his fate was sealed? Who was this Watcher to dictate his family's destiny? By the time he reached his car, the spark had grown into a flame. Daniel refused to believe his life was already written, refused to accept that he was powerless. If this entity could interfere with his family's timeline, then surely there were rules, and rules could be broken. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the contact he'd been avoiding for days. Professor Harrington had seemed crazy when he'd first mentioned alternate timelines and temporal intervention, but now his theories didn't sound so far-fetched. "Hello?" came the professor's voice, thick with sleep. "It's Daniel Collins. About what you said last week. I'm ready to listen." As he drove home through the night, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since finding those wedding photos. Hope. The Watcher might be powerful, but Daniel wasn't going to surrender without a fight, not when his mother's life hung in the balance, not when he finally had a chance to understand the truth. The dream came with startling clarity. Daniel stood among the wedding guests, watching his parents exchange vows under a white arch adorned with lilies. The scene was exactly as it had appeared in the photographs, his mother's lace dress catching the sunlight, his father's nervous smile, the rows of guests in their 80s finery. But something was wrong. At the periphery of the gathering, partially obscured by a flowering cherry tree, stood the Watcher. Unlike everyone else focused on the bride and groom, those hollow eyes were fixed directly on Daniel, as if the figure somehow knew he didn't belong in this memory, as if it could see across decades into the future where Daniel was merely dreaming of this day. "You don't exist yet," the Watcher seemed to say without speaking. "You cannot be here." Daniel tried to move, to warn his parents, but found himself frozen in place. The wedding guests continued smiling, oblivious to the intruder. Then the Watcher began walking toward him, moving through the crowd like smoke through a keyhole, guests unconsciously shifting to allow passage without ever acknowledging the presence. Daniel struggled against invisible restraints as the distance closed between them. He woke with a violent start, sheets twisted around his legs, heart hammering against his ribs. The digital clock read 3:17 in the morning. Daniel sat up, rubbing his face with trembling hands. The boundary between what had actually happened and what he was experiencing now seemed dangerously thin. Had the Watcher truly been at his parents' wedding, somehow anticipating Daniel's existence? Or was his mind simply inserting this malevolent presence into memories after seeing those photographs? Either possibility terrified him. If the Watcher had been tracking his family for decades, what did it want? And if Daniel's mind was creating these connections, was he losing his grip on reality? He reached for his phone, scrolling to the wedding photos he'd saved. The images appeared normal now, no shadowy figure lurking in the background. But that offered little comfort. The past is reaching into the present," he whispered to himself, "or the present is reaching back into the past." Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that time itself was becoming unstable around him, folding like origami until points that should be distant were touching. Whatever was happening, he was certain of one thing. He needed to understand the Watcher before it was too late. Daniel stared at his phone, his blood turning to ice. A new photo had arrived from an unknown number, and what he saw made his heart skip several beats. There he was, captured in the frame, standing on his own front porch earlier that day. But what chilled him to the bone was the figure across the street, the Watcher, partially hidden behind a tree, observing him. The simple message beneath the photo read, "Your turn." His hands trembled as he tried to call Emma, but the call went straight to voicemail. He paced the living room, peering through the blinds every few seconds. The street appeared empty now, but that offered little comfort. Whoever this person was, they had been following him, photographing him, and now they were escalating their game. Daniel locked every door and window in the house, then sat in the darkness of his kitchen with his father's old baseball bat across his lap. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this connected to his parents somehow? Was someone trying to silence him because of what he'd discovered? Or was this some sick individual who had randomly chosen him as a target? He jumped when his phone rang. It was Detective Rivera. "I need to see you immediately," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Someone is watching me. They sent me a photo." "I'm already on my way," Rivera interrupted. "Stay inside, away from windows. 5 minutes." True to her word, Rivera's unmarked car pulled up 4 minutes later. Daniel let her in, showing her the disturbing message. "This changes everything," she said, examining the photo closely. "We need to get you somewhere safe while we track this number." As they prepared to leave, Daniel grabbed the wedding album and his father's journal. Whatever was happening, the answers were somehow tied to his parents' past, a past that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. "My father knew something was wrong," Daniel said as they hurried to Rivera's car. "That's why he kept all these records, why he documented everything. He was building a case." Rivera nodded grimly. "And now whoever silenced him is worried you're picking up where he left off." As they pulled away from the curb, Daniel noticed a car down the street suddenly flash its headlights. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. Daniel couldn't sleep anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the Watcher's presence somewhere in the darkness. He'd taken to keeping all the lights on in his apartment. Yet shadows still formed in corners and doorways. Sometimes he swore they moved when he wasn't looking directly at them. He'd check his reflection obsessively in mirrors and windows, convinced he might catch a glimpse of something or someone standing behind him. But the Watcher was clever, always just out of sight, just beyond perception. "I'm not crazy," Daniel whispered to himself, though his trembling hands suggested otherwise. His phone remained silent now. No more mysterious calls or messages. That was almost worse. The silence meant the Watcher was watching more closely, no longer needing technology to track him. After 3 sleepless nights, Daniel reached a breaking point. The photo album. It all started with that wedding picture. If he destroyed it, maybe this nightmare would end. It was desperate logic, but he had nothing else to cling to. He drove to his parents' and house at 4 in the morning. Using his spare key to enter silently, the familiar home felt alien in the pre-dawn darkness, every family portrait on the wall seeming to follow his movements with painted eyes. The pull-down attic stairs creaked as Daniel climbed them, flashlight clutched between his teeth. The musty space was exactly as he remembered, except for one thing. The box labeled "Wedding" was there, but when he tore it open, the album was missing. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs as he frantically searched through every container, every dusty corner. Looking for something? The voice behind him made Daniel freeze. He turned slowly, flashlight beam trembling, to find his father standing at the top of the attic stairs. In his hands was the wedding album. "Dad, I need that," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "You don't understand what's happening." His father's expression was unreadable in the dim light. I understand more than you think, son. I've been waiting for you to find it, to see what I saw all those years ago. Daniel's hand trembled as he slid the envelope open. The paper felt strangely warm to the touch, almost alive, as if it contained something that defied the natural laws of time and space. When he pulled out the photograph, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't another old wedding photo of his parents. It was him, in a tuxedo he'd never worn, standing beside a woman whose face was both unfamiliar and somehow deeply known to him. Their wedding, a wedding that hadn't happened yet. His eyes darted to the date stamp in the corner, 3 years from now. The background showed a garden venue he'd never visited, flowers he'd never chosen, and guests whose faces blurred except for those of his mother and father, beaming with pride. "This isn't possible," he whispered. But the photograph felt as real as anything he'd ever touched. That's when he noticed the figure standing in the background, the same tall, gaunt silhouette that had appeared in every significant photograph of his family's history, the Watcher. But something was different this time. The eternally expressionless face that had haunted his family for generations had changed. The Watcher was smiling, a slight, almost imperceptible curve of thin lips that somehow conveyed more menace than comfort. Daniel understood then what his father had meant in his final letter. The cycle completes itself. The Watcher hadn't been observing his family through time. It had been guiding them, arranging them, positioning them toward some predetermined end. And now, with this photograph, Daniel realized he wasn't discovering his family's past. He was being shown his future, a future already decided. A future where the Watcher's mysterious purpose would finally be fulfilled. As he stared at the smiling figure in the background, Daniel felt the weight of generations of manipulation settling onto his shoulders. Whatever game was being played across time, the final move was approaching. And somehow his wedding would be the culmination of everything the Watcher had patiently waited for through all these years.